Hello and welcome to Unprofessional Engineering. My name is James.
And you got Luke.
Luke, today we're going to be talking about how to make cities more livable.
More like the livers.
Well, maybe. That might be part of it, actually.
Most living.
The most living, yes. How do we make it so that people want to live there and that it's a nice place to make it happen?
Do you like where we live?
Well, I don't live in the city.
Well,
so...
we're going to talk about this later. We both live in Pittsburgh, or
we do.
In the suburbs of Pittsburgh. Before we get into this, do you like Pittsburgh?
Yes, I like Pittsburgh a lot.
Would you live, if you could choose, would you live anywhere else? Or do you like Pittsburgh enough to stay?
Other than the weather,
yeah.
I like Pittsburgh enough to stay.
Yeah.
I'm feeling like I could move a little further south.
Yeah, my wife, she's like, oh, I love Pittsburgh, but like if it just didn't snow. So
yeah, that's about where I'm at too.
We can come back to where Pittsburgh is and all this whole
let's come back to that.
Living cities.
That's parking lot, that one.
Yes.
All right, so let's talk about it, Luke. Making cities more livable. What do you think needs to happen? Because right now we have, at least in Pittsburgh, think about it, we have almost no downtown life. There's not a ton of people that live there. It's mostly people commute in, work, and then leave immediately. And if you go downtown, a lot of times, a lot of the restaurants and things are closed.
Everything's closed.
Yeah, because there's just no people to support it.
Yeah, other than like a Friday, Saturday night kind of thing, whenever maybe the Arts District is open or folks are there for a theater. So what I think at kind of like a high level is, cities need, right off the bat, they need to have housing. And I think that's probably one of the biggest things. Pittsburgh is a pretty old city. And if you've ever visited Pittsburgh, I apologize for the way our roads are constructed.
Oh, goodness.
And it's just, in general, Pittsburgh, it's like one of the few cities that was never made on a grid. So William Penn or whoever the cat was that founded Pittsburgh, they didn't do it on a grid. It's kind of on this point of a peninsula coming down to the point, so that kind of maybe threw things off. I'm not sure.
I think that's the case with a lot of older East Coast cities, though. They're a lot of them are designed kind of funky.
But I also think, other cities, for some reason, have done a much better job at having housing either really close or even in the city that's affordable and it's the kind of housing that you want to live in. Pittsburgh, unfortunately, I would never live in the city because the housing that is there is like either astronomically high or it's incredibly poor. There's like no normal middle class housing in the city of Pittsburgh. It's one or the other. So, and I think that's probably one of the biggest things because you know how it is. If you have to get in a car and drive somewhere, who's going to do that?
Yeah.
But if I'm like, if I could just like walk out my door and go catch a movie, or I could walk out my door and, go to a coffee shop. I saw this thing when we were doing the research, and it was all about how cities need more coffee shops, river walkways, theaters, and bookstores. So those are the four things that unique things that they found that all these thriving cities had.
That's interesting.
They had a higher volume of those four things. And we're in Pittsburgh, so Riverwalk. I mean,
we got that nailed, right?
So
I have some friends that live downtown in Pittsburgh. If I was better at this, I would have asked them their opinion.
They're either really rich or really poor.
They did actually move from another city that actually had a downtown, so I think they might have been like, oops, maybe that doesn't work in this city.
We messed this up, didn't we?
Yeah, so maybe I'll follow up with them. So I know that I really want to talk about making cities more walkable, and that's really where I focused because it touches on all those points you were talking about, but I know you have some other things that you have listed that will fit into my talk as well. Do you want to expand on those a little bit?
Yeah, but you hate walking.
Oh, I do hate walking.
Yeah, you hate all the exercises.
If I had a hover round, I would ride that everywhere.
So I have mine broken down into a handful of categories, and this is more personal opinion, and then I did a little bit of research on how this is happening in other cities. So right off the bat, transportation is a big one, and if you've ever driven into any city, and you and I get to travel around for our work periodically, and every now and then you'll rent a car, and there are just cities that are just terrible whenever you're trying to get in and out of the city, regardless of the time. So I think one of the biggest things that they need to solve is transportation. And this is where you're talking about that, walking and that sort of thing. But I think the biggest thing is there's two big categories. The first one is personal transportation. And we talked a little bit about this whenever we were dogging on Bird for basically being a blight on society in these cities.
I love the idea in theory. Yeah.
So, but the thing that I did love, so you and I did this whole bike ride in Boston. Remember that?
It was very romantic.
It was so romantic, So I think personal transportation is something that has to happen with just transportation in general. And this is scooters, bike paths, and bikes, the ones that you park and you kind of use an app to pull the bike out. And then I think car share services, so you don't have to necessarily drive all those cars into town. You could just either carpool or share a ride.
Yeah, I think you're right. The transportation is such a huge part of it, especially because we're not going to jam all of us Pittsburghers into downtown. Like you and I both are reasonably close to downtown, and there's basically zero options for us to get there. Yeah. You have a little more if you park and ride. I literally can't get downtown after about 9 o'clock unless I drive.
Yeah, it's miserable.
That's pretty crazy.
Yeah, so and the good thing about the scooters is, number one, so scooters are taking cars off the roads, but they're also, they get thrown everywhere, and this whole bird thing, I really think this thing is going to fade. But
it's a good first step.
Yeah, but the thing I think, and this is amazing, this happened in Boston. So when you and I did the bike riding in Boston, like Pittsburgh has a few, and I'm just using Pittsburgh and Boston because those are the ones I'm familiar with. Pittsburgh has a few of those bike share racks. Boston, like literally, it was almost like Starbucks. Like every other block, there was a rack of 3 or 5 or 20, depending on where you were. So your whole idea of getting into town in Boston, which is snowier than Pittsburgh, I could actually walk out my door, walk a block and a half, get on a bike, and there was bike paths everywhere, and ride into town, park it, don't worry about someone stealing it because it's not my bike anyway. So I really think this bike share thing is something that I think could take off in Pittsburgh, and they're starting to do more with it. But if it can work in Boston, riding a bike, I think it can work just about anywhere.
A couple things about that. One, that's one of the things, and I think I've talked about it on the podcast before, that frustrates me with Pittsburgh, that we just don't have the infrastructure for it yet. And I know it's a process and everything, but like you said, in Boston, you could walk 2 blocks anywhere and hit one of those racks.
Yeah.
I know of like 3 spots in Pittsburgh that have them.
Yeah.
And that just
you
doesn't
drive
cut
to
it.
them.
And you have to drive to them, right. That doesn't cut it. Second, did you feel unsafe at all when you were riding the bikes in Boston? Because we rode pretty far and through a couple different neighborhoods.
Like over bridges.
Yeah.
And we rode from MIT to like downtown, didn't we?
Yeah, to Fenway.
Yeah. No, I felt totally safe. And I also think Pittsburgh drivers, no offense, they're idiots.
Yeah, we're the worst.
I'm one of them.
Boston's bad too, and I still didn't feel unsafe.
Yeah,
the only thing that made me feel unsafe is that it had been probably 20 years since I rode a bike, and it's not like riding a bike. It was a little bit of a learning curve.
I think we're going to have to use that picture of you and I on the bikes as the picture for this podcast.
All right, so let's move on to some more of your topics.
Yeah,
here.
so I also want to talk about public transportation, and this is also where I think,
big Pittsburgh problem.
It's another big Pittsburgh problem. So Pittsburgh has Pat Transit, which is our bus system, and it's not bad, but people don't like to ride buses, and I don't know what the stigma is there. And I think this is not just Pittsburgh. This is kind of everywhere. Buses just feel like it's an inconvenience. It's not when you need it. It's not on like a super consistent schedule like that's every 15 minutes. We do have a T that goes a little bit to the South Hills. It doesn't go up your neighborhood at all. But the T is nice, which is our trolley system.
Yeah, if you're in the South, it's fine here.
It's not bad, but you still got to drive to the T, and there's no easy way to get there, and that's not bad. But I think things that need to happen is, number one, they need to extend something like the T to the North Hills and have park and rides and those sorts of things. I think like the buses, if maybe the buses were nicer or newer or maybe greener, they would help with the whole sustainability and livable. So, I know some of the buses are natural gas. I think if they were electric, and we would never get a Hyperloop here in Pittsburgh, but this thought of Hyperloop to get in and out of town, and we did something on the Hyperloop podcast. Make sure you check it out. I think something like that, quick transportation, you're on the outskirts of the city, you drive to the outskirts where traffic isn't bad, jump on a Hyperloop, you're in town in 8-10 minutes, there's minimal traffic in town. I think that's a genius idea.
So a lot of these I feel aren't even about making a city more livable, like if you're residing there, but it is helping the surrounding areas get access to the more livable city.
Yep.
I feel like Pittsburgh has an okay system once you're downtown with the T getting dropped off. It could be expanded a bit to make more neighborhoods accessible. But like you're saying, you need to have that down there. If you're living there, you need to be able to get to these other neighborhoods quickly. And that's something I'll talk about as well later on.
Yeah.
All right, before we move on any further, let's take a break for a word from our sponsor.
I'm assuming it's the City of Pittsburgh Visitors Bureau.
We're giving them such a shout-out practically that it is not them.
Wait until like get to my stuff about them.
Ooh, baby. All right. So we do have some shout outs.
Nice.
Longtime listener Joe F.
Good old
wrote
Joey
in.
F.
He wanted to let us know, based off of one of our past episodes, that JJ Jimmy Walker from Good Times said Dynamite.
Oh, that's what it was. Good times.
Yes.
Nice.
And he also wanted to say, what's up with that James guy? Not liking glowing toilet bowls and forgetting to send him stickers. He's the worst. So he was dogging on me for your call out there of me never getting dogged on.
Thank you,
so
Joe.
somehow I forgot to send him stickers, and I still haven't sent them yet again.
You might have to send extras.
I told him I'll give him
Thank
the
you
hookup.
for dogging on him, Joe.
Our second shout out is our friend Arnold M, who did get some stickers. Sorry about that, Joe. He needs a shout out. Why does he need a shout out? Because I promised I would give him one, and we did, but it was on an episode that we kind of put in the bank.
It's one of the library.
Yeah. And it turns out all of his friends are dogging on him because he claims to be like tight with us, and we never give him a shout out.
I have a girlfriend in Canada. You'd never know
right?
her.
Right.
No. You I see her in the summer all the time. No, it's
So Arnold M,
Arnold
here's your
M.
shout out.
Yes.
And your friends, stop yelling at him.
Yeah.
But keep listening.
Arnold is our boy.
Yeah. So hopefully you all keep listening to us. But with that, if you want a shout out,
Yes.
why don't you email us at unprofessionalengineering@gmail.com.
And subscribe.
Oh, yeah, subscribe on
That's the best thing
iTunes
to
or
do is
wherever you
subscribe.
listen. And write us a review. We're up over 80 reviews. Big time. I'm pretty sure we're almost to making bank on this.
Yeah.
So go leave us a review.
Yeah, please.
All right. Moving on. Do you have any more topics? I think you had at least one or two.
I do, but I can kind of hold mine and kind of filter those in. I feel like I've been
Okay.
talking too much.
I always feel like you have. So let's talk about what I want to talk about for a change.
Well, hey now.
Making cities more walkable. And I feel like this is a big part of actually making downtowns livable because, like we're saying, you have to be living there. You're not going to be driving everywhere. That's a problem. So I listened to a TED Talk, which I never do. So this was kind of a new experience
I thought
for
you
me.
looked smarter today.
Yeah, you think so?
That's what happens when you listen to those.
That's right. So Jeff Speck, who apparently redesigned cities to make them more like pedestrian friendly, he did a TED Talk all about walkable cities and really what defines a city where a car is more of an option, instrument of freedom, as he calls it.
Wow.
So it's like it's something that you can choose to do, but it's not a necessity.
Okay.
As opposed to me, who can't basically get anywhere without it. So the typical American city, so we're not talking like a New York or an LA or something ridiculous like that. You have to offer a walk that is as good as a ride, right? So that's something Pittsburgh doesn't do right now. You need 4 things for that. You need a reason for people to walk.
Okay.
You need to have the walk feel safe, which, I mean, that makes sense. It has to be comfortable, and it has to be interesting. And this kind of goes back to some of the points you were talking about, where bookstores,
having
theaters,
stuff along the way.
things along the
Yeah,
way,
yeah.
coffee shops. So there's your reason.
Shopping,
there's things for you to be looking
grocery
at.
stores, yeah.
Yeah, so back a little bit of history. You know, I love my history.
Mm-hmm.
So back in the day, all of the factories showed up, and they were kind of mixed in with the houses, and people were getting sick and dying, and that wasn't really a good situation. So planners decided to start using what they called Euclidean Planning. Is that new to you?
It's very new.
Yeah,
to
it was
me.
new to me too. So apparently this is the separation of land into zones, so that you have like your commercial zone, your industrial zone, your housing zone.
Yeah, I gotcha.
So like think Sim City, where
Yep.
you like build blocks of stuff.
I don't play
right?
video games, but
But if you did, you could think that.
okay.
I feel like our listeners probably play SimCity.
I'm sure.
They should. Anyways, this ensures you're not going to have a walkable city. You're going to have like a subdivision where all these
Yeah.
houses are, and then you have to truck over to work. And if
Yeah,
you want to go eat, you have to truck down to the other spot. So that's no good. It leads to sprawl, and this basically leads to all those cookie cutter houses that we all know and love,
Mm-hmm.
right? And this also lends to the production of these other areas like schools and soccer fields and shopping centers all being really disconnected and needing really heavy traffic, therefore bigger roads, and therefore all of the congestion that we don't want to be walking through. So this kind of breaking out or Euclidean planning really screws up everything.
Like they thought this was a good idea back in the day.
Well, I mean, in some respects it was, because lifespans then rose greatly because you weren't sucking in all that pollution. Now maybe with these new measures that we take to make things cleaner,
yeah, you could be closer to
be-
those sorts of things without
Right.
the adverse
without
effects.
dying.
Gotcha.
So, which is apparently a bad thing.
Yeah.
So when we look downtown, there are possible walkable areas that are usually missing housing. Like that's the first thing that we're looking at, right? So to provide housing, you also have to have more retail and dining and things like that to show up for. And then another thing that's usually missing is schooling. So what they're kind of saying is if you build the housing, eventually, hopefully in short order, the other structures will show up, like commercial zones and restaurants and things like that. And I think we're seeing a little bit of that in Pittsburgh right now. Schooling is still something that we have an issue for, though, because we don't have a lot of downtown schools. So you need to be able to come up with a solution for something like that. You also need, like you said, transit, buses, subways, trains. All of these have to be walkable, though. You have to be able to leave your door and get to one of these places and do it relatively quickly. Otherwise, you become dependent on a vehicle again, and we get this whole problem.
So I have this thing, it's my 15-minute rule.
Oh, okay.
So my 15-minute rule is if I can walk somewhere, and my wife and I do this occasionally because where we live, we're on the outskirts of Pittsburgh in a suburb, we can actually walk to the grocery store. Mm-hmm. It's not like a super easy walk, you know. It's downhill and obviously backhill on the way, but it's right at 15 minutes. So whenever we're feeling like it, you know, we'll throw on, grab a couple bags and we'll walk back and forth to the store. And we do that for a handful of things. And if it's under 15 minutes, that's kind of our number. If it's over 15 minutes or it's dangerous, then we take the car.
Yeah, that's kind of like flying somewhere. You know, yeah. It's on that like 4 or 5 hour. Maybe I'll drive versus fly.
Yeah.
So does this stuff work? So here's an interesting thing. Block size plays into this big time. If you look at a city like Portland, they actually have 200-foot blocks. That's a city block to them, right?
That seems small.
It is. So this is considered a very walkable city, though. Salt Lake City, on the other hand, has 600-foot blocks. Not so walkable. So 200-block cities usually only have 2 lanes for their roads.
Okay.
600 blocks have 4 to 6 lanes on all their roads.
Gotcha.
You quadruple the accident on non-highway streets when you have 600-foot blocks.
Wow, that's some...
Isn't that craziness?
You're dropping some stats.
Right? Also, if you're interested, when you support bicycle infrastructure, it inevitably increases the number of bikers.
Hold on. Are you supporting bikes?
I don't want to be, but I think I am.
Oh, my goodness.
Based on our Boston experience, just the things I've been watching, it's kind of like this opens up a little bit more. So if you have these racks, you don't have to be able to walk outside your door and get to the subway. You can then hop on the bike, ride 5 minutes instead of walking 20 and get to the subway. It just opens up a whole new world.
Yeah.
And it also, they've shown when you have these bike paths, they've done studies on streets where the side of the street that has these bike paths and the walking areas just have this like booming commercial district, restaurants, people hanging out, all this stuff. And the other side is basically like dead because people aren't over there. And this just drives them into these locations.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it's very crazy. So some fun facts for you to wrap this part up. When you widen streets, to make them bigger, so not even adding lanes, just to give me more space, it actually increases traffic because people usually push off what time they would be doing. Or if you added lanes. So if I went from a 2-lane road to a 4-lane, people don't say, I'll wait until 10 o'clock to leave so traffic dies down. They're like, oh, the road's bigger, there's going to be less. And it actually increases the traffic on these bad times.
Okay.
Fun fact 2, 2-lane roads can handle 10,000 cars per day. I don't know. I mean, that's just what I was told.
Okay.
Fun fact 3, people go faster on wider streets. So making skinnier streets makes things safer.
Yeah, I kind of drive fast everywhere,
you
unfortunately.
You do drive very quickly.
I do.
Fun fact 4, trees slow traffic down. Now, I'm not talking like you hit a tree and therefore you're going slower.
You're not talking like the Whomping Willow, like stopping.
Whomping Willow.
Is that what it's called? Whomping Willow?
Yeah, Whomping Willow. I'm talking like if you have them along the sides of the roads, almost like decorations, but kind of like barriers.
Oh, I gotcha.
That encourages people to drive more safely.
And enjoy the scenery.
Nice.
And
fun fact 5, it's human nature for you not only to be able to know what's coming in front of you, but also to protect your flanks. So there's a rule of like having buildings along the sides of you. So like a parking lot's the worst case. It can go sprawl on forever and you don't know what's coming on your sides. You feel unsafe and it's actually unsafe because people can hit you there. But if you have buildings kind of blocking a certain height, then you feel like your flanks are already protected. So you're only worried about the back, like front and back of you.
Oh, I gotcha.
How about that?
Wow, a little psychology too.
Yeah, I thought that was
How
kind
nice
of
is
interesting.
that?
Yeah, absolutely. So that was my whole spiel on making things walkable.
I like that a lot.
I do too. I feel like I'd live downtown if we had all of those things available.
Yeah, so I want to talk about housing for a minute. So you mentioned housing for a minute, and this is more like my opinion, and I've seen some of this in different studies. So one of the things from a housing standpoint that I think is, especially older cities like Pittsburgh, or not even older cities, but cities that have a lot of existing infrastructure that doesn't support this. So something I saw recently, this was sometime late last year, I saw something about dormitories and shared facility housing. So think about, you're this, millennial, hipster, whatever you are, you're in your 20s, and you can't afford to live in San Francisco or New York or Washington, D.C. and get that posh apartment you want. But you could get a really nice dormitory-style apartment where you have a bedroom, and then things like the kitchen is a shared facility. Things like the living room is a shared facility. Yeah. So I know you're shaking your head, but that's because you're old and crotchety. But imagine if you're like a 22-year-old, 24-year-old, young graduate, and you're making enough money to do this, and you could move to San Francisco if you did this dormitory style. It looked really interesting. I mean, obviously, you can't do this with a family typically. Yeah. But the idea of having that, I think that would be an interesting thing to try in cities that are older like Pittsburgh, because we have a pretty good young crowd in Pittsburgh that's been growing.
Hipsters, smelly, dirty hipsters.
I think it would be interesting to see. How they would react to that type of housing, because the housing they're building, like up in Bakery Square, is stupid expensive.
Yeah,
it's just like they made that housing for the people that work at Google.
Yeah,
basically,
absolutely.
And then the other thing I wanted to say, and I saw this, and it was in some European. It was a while ago. It was a European city where they did the larger companies. I forget what the threshold was. Like if you had 1,000 employees, let's say, you had to have mandatory rotating work from home days. So imagine.
Okay.
So in Pittsburgh, you have UPMC, PNC, you got University. You have all these big companies that a lot of the people, the majority, probably could work from home remotely, emailing, video conferencing. So imagine if like 2/3 of that company alternated days working from home and all that traffic. So you take these big companies, and this is from like a city or state level that would enforce this. It's like, hey, you have to work from home 2 days a week. You pick the days. Let's make sure it lines up with other people so that not everybody's out of the office.
I know PNC allows people to work from home, not full time, but at least a few days a week, 2 to 3.
But imagine if they mandated it with other companies.
With other companies is the key.
And all of a sudden, let's say in Pittsburgh, you have 20,000 less people driving in every day because they alternated. I think that would have a pretty big effect.
I do question having UPMC have my nurses and doctors working from home. I just don't feel like I'm going to be getting the care that I normally would. No? All right. Before we go on, let's take a break for this week's Luke's Rant.
Okay, so this rant, we're talking about transportation, and I mentioned it before, and this is buses. And this is more of a story than it is a rant, James.
I love your stories.
So this is way back in my school days.
Wow.
And I used to,
1850?
Yeah. So way back in my school days, I used to ride the bus all the time. And this is why. So I said people don't like to ride the bus. This is why. So I'm on the bus, and this gentleman gets on the bus, has really long hair. So this is 20-some years ago, really long hair.
Was that gentleman you?
No, it wasn't me.
No, okay.
And he sits down in front of me on the bus, and the bus is full, and he proceeds to pull out a little pair of scissors about 2 inches long.
Oh, no.
And he starts to cut his own hair on the bus. And it's about a 10-minute ride into town on the bus, and this is why people don't. So slowly, as this cat was cutting his hair on the bus, like everybody gave him this 3 or 4 seat buffer. So there was nobody around this guy. He was clearly deranged and had issues.
Yeah.
And I don't know how you solve this, because every city has homeless issues and mental illness issues, and they're the people that probably rely on public transportation the most.
Yeah.
But that's why people don't ride buses, because of episodes like that. Or you get the talker. The talker on the bus is
kind of like your Uber driver.
Oh.
When you see they get a good review because of great conversation, you're like, oh no, don't talk to me.
So I feel like some of this is that's some of the stigma of the bus, and to those of you that are the talkers, stop it.
Yeah.
If I have ear pods in my ears or any kind of headphones
ear
on,
pods?
I steal my daughters.
Okay.
Don't talk to me. So yeah, it's the stigma of the bus, and if you're a bus talker, stop it. Or a plane talker; those are even worse. So
Okay. All right, moving on. Can I talk about a little bit, or do you have something?
I have two more
Okay,
things I want
hurry
to talk about. So one is, and you went with like this whole walkable angle. Mine was more in depth.
Okay, we'll go with that.
It was a more full research. So
Sure.
So this is power, and power is always an issue for a city. And you see these buildings being built that are greener. They have all kinds of engineering and design put into the building that makes them more efficient. They do daylight lighting. They do all kinds of stuff to make the buildings efficient. But a couple things that really struck me that you don't see any buildings doing, at least here in Pittsburgh and some of the cities I've visited. Why don't they have solar panels? Especially the taller buildings. You know which way the sun rises and sets. Why don't they have solar panels installed? And I get some people want views.
Yeah.
So maybe that's it. Maybe your employees want views, but you could easily
PNC just built that new building that's very green, has solar, has glass, and all that stuff.
And
but
maybe it's
the
more
older
retro.
buildings,
Yeah, maybe it's
yes, we need the
retrofitting.
retrofit stuff. Agreed.
And then the other one is small turbines for
Does
generating.
this make things more livable, though, or does it just reduce our dependency on other resources?
I think it's a little bit of both because the less dependent we're on resources, the more livable things will become because of how much it costs to live
sold.
places. Geothermal, and then I saw this one. It's a pedestrian-powered walkway. So imagine a sidewalk that turns kinetic energy, so you're walking on it, and there are sensors that actually move a little bit.
That's
and
interesting.
each time you walk on that, that kinetic energy is turned into power. So basically, imagine like a huge pedestrian walkway, miles long, going through your city center, and it's actually powered or powers a local building because of that kinetic energy of just the walking.
Awesome. So I always want to know, does this stuff work, right?
I'm sure.
Because I never think it
all
does.
does.
So there's a study going on, or at least it went on, in Australia. So the Residential Environments Project.
Good day, mate.
And so they're evaluating Western Australia's government's Livable Neighborhoods guideline. So some cool things showed up. They found that for every 10% increase in overall Livable Neighborhoods policy compliance that they followed, so the more they followed the rules, participants were 53% more likely to walk within their neighborhoods. So that's kind of like, so they're getting a big return on investment, I think.
Yeah,
They
sounds like
also found that 40%, they were also 40% less likely to feel unsafe from crime and 11% more likely to have better mental health.
Isn't
so this
Australia
is
a giant prison?
Well, it was at one point.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know. I haven't
We just
been
lost our whole entire
there.
Australian
7
audience.
listeners in Australia. So I thought it was kind of interesting that they found all this stuff. Fun fact number 3, 7, 18.
6.
Up to 80% of cases of coronary heart disease, 90% of type 2 diabetes cases, and 1/3 of cancers could be avoided by increasing physical activity, healthier diet, and avoiding smoking.
But couldn't the physical activity actually kill you too if you weren't healthy?
Especially if you get hit by a car and all that traffic.
Are you turning into a hipster?
I mean,
Are you going to bike home?
I'm
when
working
we're
on
done
my
here?
man bun. I have the bike in the back of my truck. That's like my first step.
So just driving the bike around.
Yeah.
Getting it used to the neighborhoods.
I have some examples of great things that worked, but I'd rather get into the cities that make this happen, the best and the worst. What do you think?
So I have this livable city index that you poo-pooed.
No,
you said it was wrong.
I have the most walkable. You have the most livable.
Okay, so this was done by The Economist back in 2018. It ranked 140 cities based off of 5 metrics: sustainability, access to healthcare, culture and environmental, education, and infrastructure. And all those categories, here's the craziest thing. The highest rank U.S. city was
In the world.
in U.S. city
Yeah.
was 23, and it was Honolulu.
Ooh,
Australia
rock fever.
was number 1. A whole bunch of Australia was
Australia,
super high.
the whole continent was number 1.
Hold on. I had it here somewhere. I lost it. But Australia was really high. Melbourne,
Yeah,
and
Melbourne's up
Sydney, and lots of cities in Germany, lots of cities in Europe. But the crazy thing was, so Honolulu was number 23 in the U.S. The second highest city in the United States. Guess. The Berg.
Oh, Pittsburgh.
Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania
Pittsburgh.
was number 32, and guess who it tied with?
Who?
Stockholm, Sweden.
Oh, well, that's
So,
kind of neat.
yeah, I
Didn't we
thought
just
that-
talk about Stockholm a
We
lot?
we did,
Yeah.
and because that's
The
where
Nobel
the
Prize.
Nobel Prize.
Yes.
So the interesting thing is Pittsburgh, from a livable city. So those 5, sustainability, healthcare, culture, education, infrastructure, beat out Boston, Chicago, San Francisco, and Miami.
Boom. Take that, other
Yeah.
cities.
So
So how about this? I have a different ranking. I have it for
Was-
the
was
most
Pittsburgh on it?
walkable.
Pittsburgh definitely
Pittsburgh
was
was
not on
not on the most. So let me tell you the top 10 least walkable
Least,
cities.
okay.
So worst for pedestrians. And this was for 2018.
it. Okay.
All right, at the start of it. Cape Coral / Fort Myers, Florida, worst. Palm Bay, Florida, worst. Second worst. Orlando, third worst. Jacksonville, Florida, fourth worst. Daytona Beach, fifth worst. Lakeland, Florida, sixth worst. Tampa, St. Petersburg, Florida, seventh worst. Eighth, finally, we get to Jackson, Mississippi. So they finally broke the streak for Florida, followed by Memphis, Tennessee. So in Mississippi, Arkansas, in Tennessee area.
So essentially, Florida is
And
the
then back
worst.
to Florida for number 10, so in Sarasota. So 8 of
sorry.
the top 10 Floridas
Sorry,
don't go there.
Florida.
Another reason. Now, the best walkable cities in the U.S.
Ooh.
New York City, number 1. San Fran, Boston, Chicago, Philadelphia, Seattle, Washington, D.C., Miami, Minneapolis, and Oakland, California.
So interesting fun fact. So San Francisco, I did like a. It was probably like 12 miles.
Mm-hmm.
I was staying over there a weekend with work, and on a Saturday I literally walked from like Mission District to North Beach,
Oh, yeah.
down to the
I've done
wharf, up to Chinatown and Japantown, and all.
No
the
issues
different-
either, right?
and
Felt
it was-
safe,
Oh, it was-
great.
other than the hills, I was a
Wow.
little winded.
I mean,
But
other than being out of shape.
San Francisco. That surprises me that New York, because New York is big and long.
It's walkable,
and-
though. Like, you feel safe. I mean, I did when I walked it.
I've
So-
never walked in New York.
So for our world listeners, because we have our Irish listeners, we
Tons.
have Portugal, we used to have Australia. Here's the top 10: Florence, Italy; New York City; Marrakech in Morocco;
Marrakesh.
thank you; Paris; Vancouver; Buenos Aires; Dubrovnik;
Croatia.
yeah,
Yes.
Melbourne; San Fran; and a place in Laos.
Dubrovnik, that's my joint.
Yes, I'm going to be in Florence and Dubrovnik later this year just to check out their walkability. So that'll be
Makes me-
great.
Why are you? How come I don't get to go?
Well, when you make podcast money like I do, you'll have that.
What?
Yeah. So I thought that was interesting. Good job, Italy, for having Florence.
So the other thing too, talking about walkable and livable cities, Canada did really, really well.
Did they?
Yeah. So they were mixed in. So Toronto and
You don't have
Ontario
vehicles, you
and
have
Montreal.
mooses and Zambonis.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Zambonis are slow, so you can't get run over.
Right.
So,
But if you do, ooh,
so,
baby.
Yeah, Canada did really well.
Very good, Canada.
Yeah.
Good job, neighbor.
G'day.
All right. Well, hopefully you guys learned something about livable cities and how we can take steps to make our downtowns more livable. What do you think?
Yeah.
All right. Well, until next time.
See ya.